Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed.
Before I start, Melissa, on behalf of myself and also from the members of the Finance Committee, I would like to express our condolences to your family loss and your bereavement and the rest of it. And I want you to pass on our best wishes to your family and to yourself, and to tell you you're in our thoughts and our prayers.
Chair, thank you, and thank the committee as well, both for your letter of condolence and the messages that I received from other members of the committee too. It was greatly appreciated, and I think that we all know that the death of one's mother, just the experience that is, and it was of great comfort to my family as well to receive so many lovely messages of condolence. So thank you again, Chair.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And if now we move on to if we proceed through the agenda, as I say, with apologies, I think we record Jim's late arrival as a late arrival, and I have a no. Pat, have you heard anything from Philip? Good to see you. Philip's here. Pat, have you heard anything from Matthew?
No, I tried ringing him as well, Chair. I heard nothing from Matthew.
Okay.
So I would expect him to be here.
He's late. That's okay. No, we just received an email that he's late. That's okay. Thank you very much indeed. Peter, you want to make a comment about delegation authority on their temporary standing order 115?
Cheers. Thank you, Chairperson. Members, just to remind members that if they find themselves unable to attend the meeting and they wish to delegate authority, they need to tell the clerk themselves. A text, an email, WhatsApp, anything will do, but it has to come from the member themselves. That's why. Otherwise, it's not valid. So, just to be clear on that. Thanks, Chairperson.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Declaration of interest. Is there any declarations of interest on any items on this agenda? Disagreed? Nod. Agreed. Draft minutes of proceedings on the 20th of January 2021. Just before I talk about the draft minutes, you'll be aware that there's been a push towards more use of Starleaf and going for virtual meetings. One of the things that I have expressed concern, and I've expressed concern through the committee liaisons group as well, or the chairman's liaisons group, is that sometimes some members are not fully hearing all the discussions. And indeed, I have been on a committee recently where I am not going to be able to say that I agree to the minutes because I did not hear everything that was said during that meeting because of breakdowns in the system as well. I just want to say that we haven't experienced that in this committee, with the exception, I think, when we were receiving evidence or reference to do with the fire safety regulations. And I think I will pass that on to I shall pass that on the committee's behalf to both the Chairperson's Liaisons Group and also to the Commission, who are looking at some of these issues as we come through as well. I just want you to be aware of that. Are we, having read the minutes for the meeting on the 20th of January, are we content with those?
Yes.
All those say agree, say agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. We're agreed the minutes will be published on the website. There are no matters arising. And as I let the Deputy Chair in his Arctic clothing sort of disrobe himself, that's a very fine sort of outdoor jacket there, Paul.
They even had the suit.
Yep. Is Pamela here, or is she?
Jeff's. I think they should be dialing in. So Jeff is there, but I didn't see Pamela yet.
Jeff, can you hear us?
I can ask Assembly Broadcasting to add Jeff McGuinness to the spotlight.
And Pamela as well. Is Pamela coming to join us?
Just ask Jeff where she is.
Jeff, is Pamela coming to join us, or is she coming in on Spotlight too?
She should be coming in on Spotlight.
Okay. We'll just see if we can bring her up.
She's not there, so does he want to start? I think Jeff's leading anyway.
Look, Jeff, you're leading with this discussion anyhow, and we all know ourselves well enough for you to crack on. So can you sort of give your presentation, and then we'll sort of ask the questions as we go through.
Certainly, Chair. Ready to speak on January monitoring and assist the committee with its scrutiny of the 2021 in-year budgetary position. Committee members may recall that following announcements of further allocations in November, we were holding approximately 26.6 million for contingency until the end of the financial year. On the 23rd of December, Treasury increased the guaranteed COVID-19 funding for 2021 to 3 billion, providing an additional £200 million. The Minister has indicated that he is pressing Treasury for agreement to carry this forward to next year, though it has not been built into the January monitoring round. As the £200 million will be sufficient to cover the £150 million cost of further rate support next year, the funding that was held centrally for this was made available for allocation in January monitoring. The Economy Department confirmed that the 60 million that was held centrally for business support was needed. The Infrastructure Minister brought forward proposals to use the 6 million held centrally for support to the private transport sector. The money set aside for support to ferry companies was held to be transferred to the Department for Transport in England, and that transfer has now taken place. The amount requested by DFT was 308k, so there was a small amount, about £42,000, that was made available in this monitoring round. There were a number of COVID reduced requirements from departments totalling £219.2 million resource DEL and 10.5 million financial transactions capital. Revised estimates of costs of previously announced rates relief made £46.4 million available for reallocation as well. As a result, total COVID funding available for the January monitoring round was £509.8 million. In terms of bids and allocations, the departments identified £215.6 million of resource style COVID pressures. Executive agreed allocations for all COVID
Sorry,
bids
Jeff,
submitted.
just a quick one. Did you say 508 million?
509.8.
509.8. And that's an increase on the 435, therefore, that the Minister briefed us on Monday?
So that was at the beginning of the January monitoring round. So the 400 is at the conclusion of the monitoring round. We'll get onto that.
Okay.
So in terms of allocations, the executive agreed allocations for all COVID bids submitted. For DFE, in addition to the 60 million from the centrally held funds, 94.5 million was allocated for a range of measures to support business, tourism and hospitality, further in higher education and to replace European Social Fund funding. For the Department of Education, a total of 7.5 million for both the response to COVID and costs associated with restarting education in schools. For the Department of Finance, a total of £101.6 million was allocated, 100 million of which is to continue the financial assistance scheme in view of the new restrictions, with 0.6 million providing rates relief to newspapers. For the Department for Infrastructure, in addition to the 6 million held centrally that was allocated to them, 12.1 million was allocated for lost income and PPE costs. This left 294.2 million available to provide further support in the coming days. The Executive has agreed granting flexibility requested by the Economy and Education Ministers to reallocate funding from one specific COVID measure to another related measure to help ensure that support is provided where needed and that spend occurs in this financial year. Turning to the more general January monitoring funding and pressures, departments had identified £93.9 million of resource style, 55.7 million capital style and a total of 12 million financial transactions capital reduced requirements. It is a high amount of reduced requirements at this late stage of the year, although there are some mitigating circumstances given the impact of the pandemic and the uncertainty it has created. There's 110, that meant 110.7 million resource style, 46.4 million capital style and 55.7 million of FTC of non-COVID funding available for allocation in January monitoring.
Sorry, could you just give me that FTC figure again, Jeff?
55.7 million.
That's after the 30 million's gone to Ulster University for its bottomless York Road pit.
That is after an allocation to the university in October.
I wasn't asking you to make a comment on the bottomless York Road pit. I was just saying that just seems to be where our entire FTC budget seems to disappear into. Okay, keep going.
Departments have bid for £98.2 million of resource style, 24.2 million capital style of non-COVID related pressures in January monitoring. A bid for £4,000 of FTC was also received from EO. Treasury has provided funding in relation to expected credit loss, accrued annual leave and project stratum. So bids for these have not been considered for allocation from executive funds. Northern Ireland Protocol funding this year is confirmed at 29.9 million, rather than the figure of 30.3 million in the paper, reflecting a reduction in need. The Executive has agreed allocations for all other bids submitted, totaling 58.4 million resource style, 18.1 million capital style, and £4,000 of financial transactions capital.
Okay.
In terms of the detail of those allocations in January monitoring, for DERA, 3.5 million was allocated to them for financial discipline reimbursement due from the EU, while discussions are ongoing for a mechanism for this. For the Department for Economy, 9.7 million was allocated for higher education quality research and FE colleges pay remit. For the Department for Infrastructure, 45 million was provided to provide certainty and resilience for the driver and vehicle agency and TransLink. Both allocations help ease pressures and can be proposed in the context of resources available this year. For the Public Prosecution Service, there was 0.3 million for dilapidation costs. In terms of capital, Dale, the Department for Department of Education received 18.1 million for costs of providing ICT to the Education Authority and to carry out minor works across the education sector. In terms of outcome, Chair, significance of non-COVID funding remain unallocated, with a total of, between the two areas, 346.4 million resource, 28.3 million capital and 55.7 million FTC unallocated at this stage in the year. There is a higher than usual risk of funding being returned to Treasury as unspent at the end of the financial year. There's a number of factors where we are planning for mitigation in those areas. Firstly, we're awaiting the outcome of discussions with Treasury on the carry forward of unspent funding, but it is imperative that we press ahead and consider further plans for this funding and not rely on an agreement from Treasury. In that context, the Executive has agreed to reconvene on this issue, and the Minister has called for further bids to be brought forward by his Executive colleagues. The Committee may be aware of a number of these being announced in the press recently. I anticipate that further allocations will be made by the Executive in coming days as they consider further proposals. Happy to take questions.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And obviously there is an awful lot of questions. Bearing in mind we're now talking about the Minister briefed us that he was getting a flat cash budget coming into year, and yet we're at the end of this year's budget and we've got a surplus of 509 million to be allocated in a very, very short space of time. Look, there's some real sort of significant questions we have, but the first one I have is this questions around the Treasury and discussions with the Treasury. There seems to be an implication in a lot of the discussions that there will be a large degree of carryover, but I'm not seeing from any indications from any sources anywhere else that the Treasury are amenable or even aware of the full extent of the, I think now 509 million we're talking about. So can you update us on the discussions which are going with the Treasury? Because look, it's all well and good in saying that these discussions are ongoing, but we're now at the end of January. We have potentially 2 months to spend £500 million, and unless there's a plan to do that effectively, what we're going to end up doing is we're just going to be we're going to have money put into pet projects. And one of the most significant issues we have at the moment, and my biggest concern, is that we have no real oversight of how this money has got to this point, and also to the fact that things like the Department of the Economy don't seem to be able to get the money out that's been allocated to them. And we still have had no direction on what's happening with the £95 million sort of voucher scheme and how that is likely to be bottomed out or put out. And those are really significant questions. Can you give us some sort of views on those and where we are on that?
Certainly, Chair. So just to confirm that it's £346.4 million of resource, 28.3 million capital and 55.7 of FTC unallocated at the end of the monitoring round, the 509.8 related to COVID at the start of that particular round. So, but you're right, this is a significant amount of money. And obviously there are a number of areas where we're trying to mitigate that, one of which is the Treasury route. So we have been in touch with Treasury, we've been in contact with Treasury on pressing them for additional flexibility and carry forward. Very much the case of we don't want to be penalised for trying to do the right thing with the money just because it ends up being allocated a few days later than the 31st of March, for instance. So we're doing our best to make sure, Chair, that funding, the Treasury are aware of those issues. We had anticipated the Treasury would provide a view on this carry forward actually this week, so we are anticipating that at any day. You'll be aware that the Minister, along with his devolved administration counterparts, have written to the Treasury on this specific issue. So as well as engaging with the Treasury at official level, we're doing so at ministerial level as well. So we're trying our best to impress upon them the need for carry forward so that the funding can be spent appropriately on the right way without losing it because of financial route.
Okay. Just further to that, and please tell me that this is just idle speculation and media speculation, but there are no plans to front load £95 million onto MasterCards for everybody in Northern Ireland that will be retained to the end of the COVID period, and then will be handed out to the people of Northern Ireland to boost Amazon's profits. Please tell me that is not a proposal that the Department of the Economy are thinking about.
I am not aware of that particular proposal, so if it is being considered, it hasn't reached my desk yet here.
So what are they proposing to do with the 95 million that had been allocated to them? What are they going to do with it?
So the 95 million has been surrendered as part of this monitoring round. It is now forms part of that unallocated funding, and we are now considering further bids for that fund.
Right. Okay. Some of the other things that the Minister alluded to, he talked potentially about sort of a considerable ICT uplift, particularly for schools and education. And I think the implication was that that would be a significant buy in a short period of time. If that is the case, how can we be doing due diligence when it comes to purchasing, going out to contract and the rest of it, if we've only got sort of 2 months left to try and achieve this?
Well, certainly, I'm not aware of the specifics of that particular issue, Chair, but if I can talk about how the process works for a number of these things, where departments will be in contact with Public Spending Directorate on an ongoing basis about a number of projects that are in the pipeline. So should there be something that will potentially come to fruition before the end of the financial year, departments will probably already have talked to supply teams on those particular issues and have progressed the business case to a degree in advance of any particular announcements. So it's not that business cases and suggestions for spend come to us completely cold, Chair. That degree of conversation is happening, and at official level, we will be aware of some of the things that departments are trying to progress.
Okay. And we noticed when the Minister was producing the draft budget, and we were particularly talking about health and some of the issues to do with the change programme and safe working practices. And there was a suggestion that that we'd wait until we got to mid-year monitoring round to see what any surplus there happened to be. Yet now we're sitting on £500 million. Is there any mechanism being worked out, particularly to do with health, which could be seen to be very clearly COVID related, that those monies could be ring-fenced now so that we can actually achieve what we've promised under a New Decade, New Approach, particularly for health?
One of the problems, Chair, that we'll face is the resource accounting and budgeting scheme in terms of trying to make sure that we can accrue the money to the right financial year. So if the funding is required for safe staffing in 21-22, it will prove very difficult for us to accrue it in 2021, simply because it's not in the right financial year. Those are the budgeting rules that we work under. They come down from Treasury. They're part of the kind of wider European system of accounts. And our hands are somewhat tied in those areas, but undoubtedly departments will be working on ways in which we can maximise funding and do so within the budgeting rules.
Well, also I would suggest, since this entire year seems to have been quite a lot of creative accounting going on, I think that is one of the areas we should be doing quite a lot of creative accounting on, to make sure we meet particularly the needs of our dedicated health workers and our other workers who have put themselves on the front line to try and achieve that. There was also a discussion from the Minister about one of the ways to get this money moving was to increase allocation to arm's length bodies. But it wasn't so long ago here that we had the Permanent Secretary of the Department was complaining about lack of transparency amongst arm's length bodies and where monies were going to, and the fact that the department didn't have a good oversight that once the money went to the arm's length body, how it was being spent and it was being allocated. What mechanisms, if we're serious about increasing the amount of funding we're going to give to arm's length bodies to reduce this £500 million, is that, bearing in mind we don't have a fiscal council, which we've been promised for a year, how are we going to actually monitor how these monies are being spent, bearing in mind the concerns that your own permanent secretary has already raised about arm's length bodies?
And certainly there is an issue there about how we police the funding. One of the concerns that obviously has been raised in the past is that there's a lack of transparency in where that funding is spent. So it will be for departments and for individual accounting officers to satisfy themselves that any allocations that are made in the remainder of the financial year are done so within the rules, and there is sufficient degree of transparency as to where that funding might be going and what it might be spent on and when it might be spent. Those are the key areas where accounting officers must satisfy themselves that that funding is appropriately spent.
Okay. I think the other question we have, obviously, is that now that it's difficult to say the progression of COVID and which direction it's going to, but obviously we're still going to be dealing with COVID at the end of the financial year. Indeed, anybody who notices the waves of pandemics, they always come in threes. Now, regrettably, the second one is normally the largest, but there are potentials for a continuing process to do that as well. So what degree of contingency is the Department of Finance looking for? Because, a rates holiday for small and medium enterprises for the rest of the financial year, particularly through 21 into 22, would be very welcome and a very effective way of dealing with those situations, and also supports when we reach a significant degree of vaccination where we can start slowly but surely opening up on our economy. But what sort of degree of contingency is the Department of Finance looking to achieve? We've already said you've got 100. You looked at a contingency of 150 million beforehand. What sort of contingency are you looking forward as we move into 21-22?
Chair, you're correct in saying that it's very difficult to predict the path of a pandemic and the way that a pandemic might impact the community, and how that then translates into business support and protecting our vulnerable and supporting our key public services. One of the things that we have done is obviously there's £200 million that we are seeking for carry forward from Treasury that will help to support business rates relief in 21-22. In addition to that, as part of the draft budget, about approximately 126.9, I think, remains unallocated at this moment in time, so that the executive can make decisions on that funding a little bit closer to the time when we know a little bit more about the path of the pandemic and the impact that it might have into April, May and June. So there are those two strands of approach: the 200 million that will carry forward that will help to support for rates relief, and in addition to that, the 126 that we are holding in 21-22 that we can then allocate a little bit sooner to the time, whether that's at final budget stage or whether that's into the financial year, depending on the degree of certainty that we have in what the pandemic might do in the early months of 21-22.
Okay, thanks, Jeff, for that. Just a few short ones. The Minister, when I sort of raised the question on the floor about reference how the accruals that were for annual leave accrual of 8.5 million seemed to match remarkably closely with NISRA's figures. Can we explain why the reduction in annual leave uptake seems to coincide with the reduction in sick leave during lockdown? Are we doing some HR analysis on this, or is it because people much rather work from home and sort of there is less stress than being in the office, or has there been any more detailed analysis on that being done?
I'm not aware of any detailed analysis in that area, Chair. It's probably more for HR to answer on that. I can't speak from the experience of my team, and I suspect that less stress at home is not the case. I would agree with you. Even in the realms of homeschooling.
I would agree with you there. Okay, thanks. There's a loss of 12.7 million for the InvestNI, an expected credit loss. Does that refer to a whole bunch of expected credit losses, or is that just one particular project?
I might check if Pamela knows this one, but I'm pretty sure it's an amalgamated amount. It's a one-off amount for Invest NI to cover a number of loans across their portfolio.
Yes, that's my understanding as well, Chair.
Okay, thanks. And a number of allocations refer to the Department for Infrastructure and the DVA and TransLink. Now, we understand about TransLink's reserves have been rated for years, so it's got into a position that does need its reserves rebuilt, so it enables it to keep going. But why are we doing it for the DVA? Was the DVA's reserves being rated as well, or what's the situation there?
I'm sure the Department for Infrastructure Minister may not accept the language of being rated, but certainly DVA's reserves...
For the record, since we're unanswered, is the executive to replace reserves for TransLink as it appears to be doing for the DVA? Does that sound better, Jeff?
Yes, Chair. So the DVA had its reserves depleted in previous years. That combined as well, obviously, with a significant loss of income over the last 12 months has allowed the Infrastructure Minister to bid for and receive additional funding for DVA.
Yeah, and that obviously included right at the beginning the money for refurbishment of lifts and the fact that we haven't been doing any planned maintenance on a lot of the equipment.
Yes, my understanding is that has been that was bid for and funding received.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for that. Philip, are you there? You can bring Philip in.
So Assembly brought, there we go.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. Thanks very much for that. I mean, obviously, Jeff said that the Treasurer may get back with some information this week, and that would be welcome. I mean, I think it would be extremely disappointing and probably irrational if there wasn't a certain latitude to carrying money over, given the pandemic and the late arrival of. I mean, I listened to the Minister's responses to questions and given very good detailed explanations as to why we're in this situation. I mean, I also welcome the fact that the Executive is meeting again. I mean, it is. I mean, ultimately, a test for the Executive to ensure that money isn't handed back to the Treasury, given that, I don't think there will be much public support when we have businesses and employees and all of the rest of that trying to get through this pandemic. So, I mean, just in terms of some of the points that, Jeff, you've already made, is there likely to be a further funding review even later on between now and April? I mean, is there timeframes for this current phase when departments make bids, when a decision will be made? And I mean, it is important, obviously, that there is transparency and scrutiny around the decisions, and they're not just handing out money for the sake of it. But I do think that, as the Chair has said, there are businesses out there, there are employees, there are schemes where people have been maybe a wee bit unsatisfactory about the amount of money and the time frame and getting it out. So I think that we should be looking at that. There are other, I mean, could we ask, for example, are there bids in for student support? I know that's been detailed, and for health workers, and even within the Department for Finance. Does the Department for Finance have any proposals itself? And I mean, are they, for example, maybe looking at the allocation of the business support grants within this department in terms of either expanding the remit or even the value of it? And then just lastly, because I mean, under normal circumstances, road infrastructure would be getting a huge pot of money at this time of year. And I mean, certainly as we come out of this freeze, I mean, I just locally, I mean, the roads are in a terrible state. So obviously I would expect a certain amount of money to go into the Department for Infrastructure to, particularly in rural roads, bring them up to a decent standard.
So just take those one at a time. You're right that there are, the Executive will meet again. My understanding is that that will probably happen in a number of stages as proposals come to fruition and are brought to the table. One of the things that the executive, it's a fine balancing act to work out, because we could have, or the executive could have delayed monitoring for another week, and therefore we could have had a few more bids on the table. But obviously we need to make sure that there is the announcements are made as soon as we have firm proposals. So I suspect that rather than wait for a number of additional bids, the executive will do that in a number of stages, so that as I said, as things come on board and as proposals are raised and agreed by the executive, then announcements can be made as soon as possible. One of those difficult areas where there's not one correct right approach to it, but that's my understanding. In terms of the other things that you mentioned, my understanding is that there is a bid for student support in the process, and that will be brought to the executive in due course, and decisions made on that in due course. Looking at our own department, my understanding is that we, along with all the other departments, are looking at ways in which we can enhance the support that we have already provided to both business and citizens and the public sector where we need to do that. So I understand that there are further proposals being looked at within our own department and right across other departments. On the roads maintenance, my understanding is that DFE have sufficient funding for their planned roads maintenance schemes this financial year. There was no further funding requested from them, and I'm not quite sure whether that might be a capacity issue on their side, not within the department itself, but within local road contractors and things like that. I don't quite know. That was more for the detail of the infrastructure department, but certainly that was suggested, and we had asked about further bids from that area, and I don't think they were able to provide anything.
Okay,
Jeff,
and just
sorry for that, just to cut across there, just to get that correct. So, Jeff, that the Department of Finance asked Department of Infrastructure if they wanted to bid for more, and the Department of Infrastructure came back and said no.
My understanding, Chair, yes, we will ask all departments about what's coming up, those things that we would normally expect at the end of the financial year, such as roads maintenance, and we will ask departments about that. And if the department has sufficient funding for what it plans to do, then obviously no additional funding will be asked for or allocated. So that's we can double check that, Chair, but that's my understanding.
Right, because I can think of quite a few holes in South Antrim need filled, and as can North Antrim.
Yeah, and Chair, I mean, if I can come back in again, obviously I was reading either yesterday or the day before about a rural primary school having to take on a private contractor for gritting the road. So, I mean, I think people will be looking in at that department thinking maybe there should have been additional bids for money for that. But in terms of my criticisms of the Treasury, should they not be forthcoming on this? I mean, has the executive and the department explored all the possibilities for our own financial system being relaxed to ensure that the money, I mean, obviously we have to have good governance and the money has to be spent properly and there has to be proper scrutiny. But given the context of the pandemic that we're in and the situation we find ourselves in, have the executive and the Department of Finance explored all the possibilities for relaxing the rules that allow, still maintain good governance, but allow this money to get out as quickly as possible?
One of the issues that we are very constrained by is the overarching public expenditure rules as set out by Treasury. We're constrained by resource accounting and budgeting. But certainly we have been looking at all that we can do to encourage spend in the appropriate ways with the appropriate controls and mechanisms and governance in place. But certainly trying to push the boundaries of that without going over the rules and breaking the rules. Obviously, we have been in touch with Treasury on specific areas of funding to try and understand what the best mechanism is for spending without going over those particular rules. We have our department has been in touch with the Audit Office on those where Treasury has given us more information. We have been in touch with the Audit Office to make sure that the Audit Office are content with what Treasury are saying, and that should we utilise some of those areas, then the Audit Office then will be acceptable to them when it comes to finalising accounts and that sort of thing. So we are doing as much as we possibly can to facilitate departments in their spending proposals for this financial year.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Jeff and Chair.
Okay, thanks. Gemma? Gemma?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jeff, as well. You kind of covered this in your answer to Philip, but obviously roads are a huge issue in my constituency, and if the Chair thinks there's potholes in South Antrim, he really needs to come to Fermanagh for a while. But another issue I'm dealing with is the sewerage infrastructure in Fermanagh, and the Infrastructure Minister has told me nothing can be done for another 6 years due to underfunding of NI Water. And I know NI Water got money at the end of 2020, but I'm just wondering, has the Infrastructure Minister, and again this could be just a question for the Infrastructure Department, but has the Minister put in any bids, any further bids for NI Water?
As far as I understand, there have been no further bids for capital funding for 2021. Again, capital funding is a much more difficult type of funding to implement by the time before the end of the financial year. Obviously, it requires significant work to be done on the ground, and funding tends to be released in tranches to cover that. So we haven't had any further capital funding requirements from the Infrastructure Minister as of today. I'm not aware of any. So the answer is no, but there are good reasons for that answer.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. And then I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask you anyway. If councils were to have shovel-ready projects, is there a way they can apply directly to the Department of Finance for this funding, or do they have to go through communities or DAERA?
Yeah, we don't have the what they call the VERAs. We don't tend to provide funding directly to councils from the Department of Finance. The conduit would tend to be primarily the Department for Communities, but also the Department for Agriculture in certain specific cases. So we would be tending to say that should funding need to go to councils or want to be directed to councils, it should go through those channels, because they have the expertise and the ability to kind of direct that funding appropriately, and the government arrangements in place and all that would tend to hold us up should we have to try and do it ourselves. Okay,
no, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Chair. That's my questions.
Sorry, Jim, just a quick one. Jeff, just for clarity, the 70 million RRI that the Department of Infrastructure bid for Northern Ireland Water, that's still going through? That is going through?
Yes, that relates to the 21-22 financial year, Chair, so that will be allocated to them as part of the budget in April.
Right. Okay, thanks. Jim Alister.
Yeah, so Jeff, you have somewhere between 300 and 500 million available to spend. What do the current bids total?
I'm not specifically aware of where we are in terms of the current bids. Certainly, we've had a number of bids that have come through at official level. Some aren't necessarily just agreed at ministerial level just yet. So it's not in the hundreds of millions at this moment in time. But it's certainly it's a significant amount.
So when you say come through at official level but not ministerially approved, do you mean not ministerially approved by the asking department?
Yeah, so we will have discussions with all departments at official level, and departments will share ideas on potential projects and maybe try and get views from us in terms of feasibility and that sort of thing. So we would be having those discussions, but it wouldn't be correct to kind of mention any of those without appropriate ministerial cover, because by the time it gets through accounting officer or minister, those things may have changed significantly or have dropped off the table.
And have you any ministerially approved applications?
I think there are some in there for executive agreement, but I don't have the details to hand.
Obviously, it's too late to do a further monitoring round. So what is going to be the mechanism for approval of any grants, bearing in mind the need to protect ourselves against rushed and inappropriate spending?
Certainly, that's a significant thought in our processes, that funding needs to have the appropriate governance in place. It needs to demonstrate VFM. There needs to be appropriate mechanisms in place so that public spending is spent appropriately. We will, whilst we have finalised January monitoring, we have had a number of allocations right across this financial year. We think that January monitoring normally would be the third set of allocations in a year. We think it's probably now the 10th set of allocations this year, and the executive then have the ability to allocate further funding as we go forward. Obviously, that has an impact on estimates, and we will have to consider how best we incorporate the room that would be required for additional funding further down the year as we come to agreeing the estimate process.
And can you assure us there is no shortcutting of the business case requirements?
Well, certainly from our point of view in the Department of Finance, on the supply side of things, they will always be seeking business case approval where appropriate. For some departments, business cases will remain within the department and they don't come to the Department of Finance, but wherever business cases are required by the Department of Finance, that due diligence will be carried out, absolutely.
And is there a consciousness that ultimately any of these rushed decisions could well come to examination by the Audit Office?
Every spending decision that is taken right across the system has the potential to be examined by the Audit Office. That is very much in our focus. It's very much part of a parcel of everyday work for supply teams in terms of approving business cases, making sure that the appropriate value for money is in place, making sure that departments are aware of the governance surrounding business cases. It's part and parcel of the supply team's work, so I wouldn't see it any different.
Just finally, we're all taxpayers. This is the money of taxpayers from across the UK. There should be no shame in returning money if you have too much money to taxpayers and to the Treasury. Should there be?
You are correct that this is taxpayers' money, and that is the way that we in Public Spending Directorate look at it. It's not our money or department's money; it's the taxpayers' money. And should we have schemes and projects and programs that deserve that taxpayers' money through appropriate VFM and governance, and should the executive agree to those, then we're happy to release that funding. But that's the rules that we would apply. We would always make sure that any taxpayers' money that is approved by DOF is approved in the right way at the right time.
Thank you.
Okay. Jeff, just a quick one. Budget authority, you said there about departments with spending limits and mightn't have to come to the Department of Finance. Have those been increased, and what's the current limit? Is it £1 million or has it been increased?
So it very much depends, Chair, on the specific area. So for capital projects for some departments. It could be £1 million, it could be £5 million. I can't quite remember. There are different spending limits or delegated limits, as we would call them, for different departments, depending on previous history, how departments have performed in the past, the level of overall budget for the department, that sort of thing. On the resource side of things, there tends to be more delegation for resource programs and projects, except potentially where they are novel or contentious, they would come to the Department of Finance. So the delegated limits haven't been changed in the last, I'm going to say, at least 12 months, Chair. I'm not quite sure. It's not my side of things, but certainly there hasn't been any significant changes in them that I'm aware of in the last year or at least a year.
I'd imagine everything from the Department of the Economy now must be coming to you, because everything they seem to be doing is novel and contentious combined.
Certainly, I think we would probably have seen a number of new things that wouldn't have even crossed our radar 12 months ago, Chair.
That's one way of putting it. Okay, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for your time and the extensive questions and answers you've given. You do certainly put in a shift when you come here, so thank you for your time. I suppose my question is around, well, what I did ask the Minister in a private capacity earlier on in the week was, and I wasn't expecting an answer then, and maybe you won't be able to answer me this at this point in time either, is, whilst we're not comparing apples and oranges with regards to Wales and Scotland, do we know the pressures that those jurisdictions are under, those regions are under with regards to underspend? And is it comparable then with Northern Ireland?
It's a good question. It's one of the things that we would discuss at official level with other areas. They certainly are seeking similar levels of carry forward for their administrations as we are. Obviously, that's evidenced by the joint finance minister letter to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. In addition to that, we might actually know more this afternoon, because our minister is speaking to his Scottish and Welsh counterparts this afternoon on this particular issue.
Okay, so with regards to bidding, you've told us there that you have actively, as a department, you have actively went out and approached or reached out to other ministers to see about how we can spend the underspend in what will become an agile monitoring round, I suspect, of some description or guise. That strikes me as a completely different approach from what the Minister has taken in year, where the Minister has told the Assembly time after time that he doesn't create bids, he waits for other ministers to bid and then he gives out the money. Right. So now he's becoming proactive. Why could the Minister, the Finance Minister, have been proactive in any of the other previous monitoring rounds?
Perhaps it's my loose use of language on this one. So we would, in each monitoring round, we will always ask departments for what pressures they are facing. We will always go out and proactively do that. We will always, as supply teams within Public Spending Directorate, they will always be in touch with their departments on a weekly, or potentially more often, they will be in touch with their departments on what the departments are doing, what the financial outlook looks like for each department, and then ultimately, when we request details of financial pressures, then they will come to us through either a monitoring round or, as you say, a more agile monitoring round, and we will then look at those. But certainly, it's our job to know what's going on out there, and we want to know what the pressures are for all departments in every financial exercise. And I suspect I would come under significant criticism from the committee should I not be asking those particular questions.
Yeah, it just strikes me as a complete sea change of approach that the Minister has taken every time he has come to the Assembly. And I hear what you're saying, and it's a novel defence that you've made there with regard to your language as opposed to the Minister. So I take that, Jeff, and I commend you for it. Can I ask then, how whenever you allocate money to a department like infrastructure with a rolling, live, breathing capital list, where does the limit draw the line whereby you allocate money to DFI, and it's usually through a monitoring round, so it's usually done and dusted by now. So imagine you then give DFI money a day before the new tax year for work that they had scheduled in for beginning May. Does that work?
I guess we'd have to look at the specifics of it, but on the information that you have provided, I certainly wouldn't be recommending providing them funding on the 31st of March for anything that is happening in May. That would, to me, would break the rules.
Would it break the rules if the work was commenced in this tax year, but maybe money hadn't been allocated to supplies or contractor?
Again, it probably depends on the individual project and the specifics of it, but certainly there would be a much stronger argument to provide funding for it had it commenced or will it commence in this financial year. Certainly there'd be obviously it would ultimately come down to what audit would say, but I imagine there would be a strong argument to say we are allocating this money now because this project is commencing its boots on the ground on the 31st of March.
And of course, that would be capital, not resource, isn't that correct? If it was a rolling programme of capital list like DFI, or even for schools or hospitals for that matter?
Yeah, it depends on the individual project, but if it is an improvement to the asset, and it will be capital in nature. So the likes of roads maintenance isn't capital in nature, because you're just kind of maintaining it at a level that it is. But if it is actually a new build or a new road or a significant upgrade, then absolutely it's going to be capital in nature.
So you could, it's not far-fetched then to say that the infrastructure minister could then, because this is a natural thing usually for January monitoring rounds, whereby we, for want of a better word, dump money towards those that department who has been traditionally underfunded, usually in the upfront budget and then in the earlier monitoring rounds. We would usually then give them, the executive would give them the money then to furnish out a good bit of their rolling capital programme or their resource programme with regards to improvements to roads. The only thing that would limit DFI maybe is capacity of contractors to get people on the ground. But is that something that you're actively, I'm not saying it's the best use of money, but at least it will get it on the ground with regards to brand new surfaces. Is that something that you're actively considering with regards to the resource?
Yes, sir. So this roads maintenance issue was something I think that we have been in discussion with DFI on as part of the January monitoring. It is something that, as you rightly state, is probably restricted by the contractor at the end of it, as opposed to anything that the department itself does. And potentially the department might have had funding its roads maintenance kind of resource budget planned out sufficiently for it not to require additional funding in January. So it's something that we can go and look at because absolutely it's something that if it's possible, if it's viable, if the infrastructure minister wants to look at that particular issue and can find capacity for it, it's certainly something that we can consider as part of a further allocation.
So given that logic then, where does the permanent disabled pension, what budget does that come out of? Capital or resource? Or where will it come out of?
My understanding that it's a resource budget.
So, if you get to a certain period of time this tax year and you know you're going to hand money back to the Treasury, it will then effectively be Treasury money. And I, notwithstanding the principal political arguments as to who should pay the permanent disablement pension, if we're about to hand £346 million back to the Treasury and ask the political argument that they fund the permanent disablement pension, what is stopping this Minister and this Department from holding that money to pay permanent disabled victims their pension?
My understanding, and I'm only on the periphery of this, but my understanding is that the scheme itself is not in a position to pay out this financial year. There have been administrative costs provided to that scheme as part of the draft budget to enable it to be in a position to pay out, I think, by May. But certainly at the end of March, where the financial rules apply, I'm not sure they would be in a position to pay out anything at that stage.
So are you saying that you can't hold in any sort of way money, knowing that there will be a cost for a duration of lifetimes, that you can't have that money sitting in trust or storage or some sort of vehicle or company in order to administer those payments over a period of time?
Again, it would probably be for those that would be administering the scheme to confirm this, but my understanding would be that until we get to the point where we can, what they call, accrue the money, so that we can pin down exactly what it is, when it is, how the scheme works, who gets paid, and at what stages, that then we can't, as you say, hold that money in trust. Otherwise, that would be something certainly that we would consider.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Thanks very much today.
Thank you, Jeff.
Melissa, you got us?
Good points.
Hello?
Yep, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah. Jeff McGuinness, just thank you for your statement as well too. And I know that I'm covering ground probably that has already been touched on, but at the same time it's very pertinent, I do think. Not just for say it's an MLA, but I get the comment from the general public, that whenever they hear about monies going back or the likes of it, and which is going back to the taxpayer, they're still sort of shocked to think that that we don't have that state of readiness even within departments, that in the event of money being allocated, we'll say, at a late date, that they're not ready to make use of that money for what in many cases are very, very obvious gaps that we have within our whole sort of infrastructure, we'll say, at the present time. And I'm not just talking, whenever I'm using the word infrastructure, I'm talking about the general organisation of our society in every respect, whether it's education, health, or the roads. But take like in particular, like this whole thing about the roads, and that where projects haven't been coming forward, and yet not. I know that at the present time, you actually have community groups throughout the country that are resorting to carrying out what previously was the duty of the likes of road service. And I'm thinking in particular in terms of gritting, that only over this last couple of weeks, all of a sudden it became a real sort of crisis situation, that not only was grit not being put out on many of the roads, but in particular, we'll say in the more urbanised areas and so on, grit boxes and that weren't being supplied. And yet and all, whenever we were in contact with the road service, we were just sort of invariably getting that same excuse. There's cutbacks, we don't have the money, we can't carry out sort of our duties as we would like to, or as what we have done so in the past. And then you hear then that there hasn't even been a submission made, we'll say, to the likes of finance and so on for work such as that. And I'd like to congratulate you as well too, Jeff, in the way that you actually defended the positivity within finance themselves, and that they did react positively to departments, not only in the allocation, we'll say, of funding, but in requesting them to come forward with the ideas. And let's face it, that just isn't entirely the responsibility of the Minister of Finance or the Finance Department, but each and every other minister too should be taking full responsibility for what it is that they are responsible for. The other comment that was made too, and I really welcome it, that again that there are been taken into consideration, i.e. provision for students and so on, because within that whole educational system right up to, and in particular the forward to higher education, they have suffered greatly as a result of this whole pandemic in every respect. And I'm glad to see that initiatives are being brought forward there, and hopefully that it will help to sort of soften the blow or ease the difficulty they have now in their participation in further and higher education. And I'm sure there was, one other point just that I do make, and I'm not that sure just where in fact responsibility for this actually lies, but it is still the case that there are individuals maybe who are maybe the sole director of a company or the likes of it, that are falling through the net and are not receiving the type of support that one would expect. And I know because I've actually dealt directly with some of them myself and so on, so I'd like to think that someone has been a wee bit maybe more imaginative and been able to at least be in contact with and taken on board, i.e. those people that are falling through the net in terms of support during this time, especially in view of the fact that quite clearly it seems to be the case that there is an abundance of funds and that there to be imaginative and to come forward with projects that would meet the criteria in terms of good governance and everything else. So, as I say, these are all mainly just statements rather than questions as such.
Maybe just, Chair, to pick up on a couple of those things. Absolutely. Departments tend to have a number of projects that are in states of readiness. I suspect that at the end of a number of those departments and will get funding in a normal year. We've just experienced an unprecedented year, and I struggle to use the word because it's kind of lost some of its meaning over the last 12 months, but certainly in my 18 years of working in public finance, I haven't seen a year like this, that we have had such significant amounts of additional funding, such unparalleled work by departments to get new initiatives and things that we wouldn't have considered 12 months ago up off the ground running, try and get accurate cost assessments for them, try and get accurate usage statistics that would help us to inform these projects and programs, things that potentially in a normal course of events you would do over 12, 24, 36 months, we're doing now in 3, 4, 5 months. The state of readiness has changed somewhat since this time last year, where we would have had a number of departments ready with kind of run-of-the-mill changes that they could have taken on board at the last minute to help us spend whatever funding that we would have had. In terms of the other thing you were talking about, in terms of falling through the net, we have, and the Minister has called yet again for all departments to look at areas where people are not getting appropriate support, where they have fallen through the net, where for one circumstance or another they haven't been able to pick up the support that has been provided to others. The Minister has been encouraging those around the kind of the business and the economy sectors to look at these things and to try and find where those gaps are and fill them. Certainly that's what we've been encouraging departments to do.
Okay.
Okay. Pat?
Thank you.
Next one is Pat.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you, Pat.
Thanks very much, thanks very much. Jeff, there's no doubt that I am very concerned with the Department of Finance, and we're sitting, and we've already heard, with 509 million. But my question is, I've listened to a lot of talk there and I hope you will agree with me on the bids which was made to the Department of Infrastructure. It sounds like this is an infrastructure meeting rather than a finance meeting, and there's £509 million that have unspent. We should be asking questions of our Finance Minister where that is. But I noticed from the structural maintenance budget for the Department of Finance, of the Department of Infrastructure, there was 75 million capital as a result of that bid, and adjustments, and they were able to increase that on a bid up to by 11.7, so there was 83 million, so the extra money was given there. And if I look at all the other departments, they were the only department to return 0.18%, so they've managed to keep things on track and deliver throughout the year within their budget. Other departments are returning millions, and we're sitting on millions there. Can you give me the very substantial sums that are left unspent in the department to undertake another monitoring round before the end of the financial year? And I'd love this in really plain English. And will the Minister make a further statement on the anticipated or the other allocations?
So, yeah, absolutely. We can give an undertaking that the Minister will present to his executive colleagues further bids for consideration, and should those be agreed by the executive, they will be announced as part of what we would call that kind of agile monitoring round. I mean, you had mentioned there we had £500 million at the start of this monitoring round. We're sort of sitting at around 350. A number of factors there that we didn't anticipate. The additional money from Treasury, we didn't anticipate, and we probably couldn't have anticipated that when we concluded October monitoring. There was the return of the High Street scheme at about £100 million that we didn't anticipate. There was a further reduction from health of £90 million that we didn't anticipate. There are a number of good and valid reasons why that funding has been returned. It's just, it happens that those significant amounts of money then make us have that additional money that we now have to get moving. You're absolutely correct that the Department for Infrastructure has they've worked their socks off in terms of trying to get funding sorted. Look at the support that we have provided to TransLink for lost income, for resilience, that kind of area, for DVA. We've had a number of, the Minister has been working on making sure that, as you say, additional capital has been provided where necessary. So there are a number of good things coming out from all departments. And all departments are doing their best, and if I have given the impression that they aren't, I apologise, because that's not the case at all.
But Jeff, I do notice that other departments, just looking through the figures, are returning millions of pounds, and I noticed that department, the Department of Infrastructure, it returned 0.18%. So that
yes.
is quite.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things there is that the Department for Infrastructure are providing that funding to established groups, established kind of areas like the likes of TransLink and the likes of DVA, other departments, the Department for Health, for instance, looking at how it deals with that pandemic and that pandemic response. I can understand why they may have provided initial estimates that weren't as accurate as they would have liked it to be. The likes of the Department for Economy, where there are a number of novel schemes that are coming out, and it is hard to understand the uptake of a scheme like that. It's hard to understand what the cost estimates might be for new and emerging schemes. So you're right, there are a lot of departments out there that are handing back additional money. I think it's just a context of pandemic planning at this moment in time.
But even with that pandemic planning, Jeff, do you not agree that this is, I know it should have actually speeded this up an awful lot quicker. Do you not think that it's going to be nearly impossible now as we come and we're moving near this financial year, and there's no guarantee that this money will be allowed to roll over, any of it? And just one more point at the end of this one, Jeff, please.
Sure, and yeah, there is no guarantee at this moment in time. Obviously, we're hoping for some sort of understanding from Treasury and some sort of formal agreement from them in the next day or two to allow us to plan appropriately for the remainder of the financial year. We are doing our best to make sure that funding is allocated as appropriate in the appropriate ways, and we are. The Minister is very clear that he wants his ministerial colleagues to help him out in bringing forward programmes and projects that allow the appropriate amount of COVID support for both businesses and the vulnerable.
I hear what you're saying, but I also have to say to the Minister that there should have been more schemes sitting there and ready to go from the start of the year. We should have been planning for this in this year of the pandemic, that this would not have all been taken up, and it will come in. And it is sort of congestion into here to the last 2 or 3 months in order to get the spend.
Yeah, and one of the issues with that is that we could not have 12 months ago, we could not have predicted that Treasury would provide over £3 billion of additional money in the financial year. We lived essentially on the drip feed of Barna consequences up until July, where we got the UK guarantee, and that was increased a number of times. Had we known what that number would have looked like at the start of the financial year, then I think we would have planned in a different way, and we would have planned just to understand how to appropriately use that £3 billion across the system, where we haven't been able to do that in a looking at the kind of the big picture until now, where we've finally got the last £200 million in December, and potentially Treasury could provide additional money before the end of the financial year, depending on what that guarantee looks like. So if they did, we would expecting them to allow us to carry forward anything that they provided between now and the end of the financial year.
Thank you, Chair. Just this last one. Well, I mean, can you advise on the specific resource and capital amounts proposed by the Department, the Treasury, for this carryover? Because it seems to be moving every week I go in. And last week, with all of the figures, and I'm back in again today, and there seems to be another set of figures coming at us. And it's the amount of spend. And I heard what some of the other MLAs said there about it is Treasury money. But we all know the hardships that's out there. And I'm coming from a business point of view. Businesses are closing. They will not open. And it's important that we get every bit of aid we can out there in order to get them to survive.
Certainly, I mean, the amounts coming out of January monitoring combined COVID and non-COVID. So we're looking at what funding is available for right across the system between now and the end of March. It's £346.4 million of resource, £28.3 million of capital, and £55.7 million of financial transactions capital. That are the numbers that are set in stone at the end of the January monitoring position, and that's the numbers that we'll be working with going forward.
I spoke with the Chair yesterday, and I'm hoping that some of that capital there may well be like an oven ready goal, something that we can pull there in order to try and use some of that money up to the betterment of Northern Ireland and where we are on some capital project. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Matthew?
Thank you very much, and apologies for arriving late to yourself, Chair, and to Jeff. So apologies if I missed any pertinent bits of the presentation. Just, Jeff, you mentioned the global figure, so it's about still, as of the end of the monitoring round, it's about 430 unallocated, which is largely resource style, but also includes capital and FTC. A few questions asked. As of last week, the position was, the view was that there would be at least 85 million allowed to be carried over under the budget exchange scheme. So you could minus off 85 from that 346, because that will be also the expectation, I think, from yourself and Joanne, was that there would be 200 addition, the 200 that was, I think, allocated in November, late November, early December would also be allowed to be carried over. So if that's right, is it more like 146? Sorry, not 146. Sorry, more like just over 100.
No, not quite. So you're correct that we would be allowed under the budget exchange scheme to carry forward amounts. So it's about 0.6% of our overall resource tail, which equates to about 88 million for this financial year. So you could, in theory, you could take that off. That would be assuming that departments would fully spend on their already allocated budgets. The £200 million carry forward isn't part of this process, so that isn't in those figures. So it's additional to those figures.
So the 200 million, meaning you haven't included that because you're certain that you're going to be allowed to carry it over. So if the Treasury turned around and said you can't carry it over, it would be 540. Not saying it's going to happen, but
yes, we would be fairly confident that Treasury will look on this favourably. But you're right, we don't know that until we get formal confirmation. So
you're on resource tail. You're asking, in addition to the 200 million, which you think will probably be allowed to be carried over, the 85, which is sort of part of the normal practice under the budget exchange scheme. You're effectively asking for as much of the 346 and as well as the 28.3 capital and 55 FTC. Yeah.
Yes, we would be asking for proposals to spend all of that.
Just in the past, yeah. You look a remarkably young man for someone who's worked at and devolved spending for so long, but is this, I know we're in a completely unique year, but in terms of, in proportionate terms, what have there been previous years where obviously we have a chronic problem with underspends generally, but is this the worst you've seen or the most substantial you've seen in proportionate terms?
It's not the most substantial I've seen, but we've had significant underspend in previous years where we've previously had the ability to carry it forward. So since the budget exchange scheme has come in and capped the ability for us to carry forward unspent funding, this is unprecedented.
This is the largest amount since the budget exchange scheme has come in. Is there any argument saying to the Treasury, well, the budget exchange scheme was a response to, in part, as I understand it, tell me if this is wrong, a belief of the Treasury that there was a perverse incentive to having much more loose rules around carry forward? Is part of your argument to them, well, this is a unique year, the perverse incentive doesn't exist because this is a unique year, because money's been allocated that we haven't had the opportunity to spend properly?
Yes, so very much the argument is that we will have very real need on the ground in terms of COVID support. We could potentially have projects that may be hitting the ground early April, and for the sake of a few days, this seems to be a perverse way of applying those particular rules, and they have the ability for us to waive those rules for the devolved administrations in some form or other. So that's the argument that the Minister and his counterparts have put across to Treasury, and we are awaiting their outcome.
The biggest single item of underspend is basically the High Street voucher scheme, I think, I'm right in saying.
95.
Yes, of departmental specific underspend, that's right. It's the 95. The other area, which is very significant, is the fact that because we got £200 million extra that we may now carry forward, we had been holding £150 million for carry forward for rates that then came into play. So that £150 million, the £90 million from the High Street voucher scheme and the £90 million from the Department of Health from their reassessment of pandemic pressures, are the kind of the three big ticket items in that overall scale, that overall kind of pot.
Okay. Is there, when that scheme was announced, I think it was only in November that scheme was actually announced. The money was allocated in November, I believe, or October.
I'm not quite sure whether it was November or October. It's sometimes these kind of allocations all kind of merge into one for me. So you're right. It was about that time.
But obviously, and Paul Frew asked about this, but obviously part of the challenge here is about what exactly is represented by spending and when. Was there any? Why was that money allocated if there was still high degree of uncertainty about whether shops would be open? Presumably, it didn't need to be. The money didn't need to be spent as in people didn't need to physically spend the vouchers by the end of the financial year, or did they? Or was it that people talk me through why that was allowed, as it were? Where there's clearly a degree of uncertainty about when it would be deliverable.
Yeah, and I think that it's not quite my side of things in terms of that the specifics of the DFE scheme, but certainly my understanding is that there were a number of potential ways that they were exploring to do this, and as they kind of worked through those particular issues and understood the implications and were ruling out what they could and couldn't do, then that they've come to the realization that there isn't a good way to spend the funding appropriately with the right governance in place before the end of the financial year. I think you're right that it's not necessarily about when people spend vouchers. It is more about when we commit to providing the people with vouchers, and there was particular difficulties around that.
So it wasn't actually the fact that shops remain closed, it was the fact that, in a sense, that what you're telling me is it's irrelevant that we've had a longer lockdown than any of us anticipated, because it wasn't really about whether people could get out to the shop and buy stuff. It was about this scheme actually being delivered and the money being in the account of whoever was providing it.
And I'm not an expert on it, so I may have taken the wrong end of it, but certainly my understanding is that it's more around understanding when the funding accrues to the financial year, and it's not necessarily that happens whenever someone spends the voucher and puts it in a shop's till.
Right. Just one final couple ones, if I may, Chair. Just in terms of being completely sort of ambitious and novel about how you get this money, as it were, out the door, or at least committed in the next few months. Is there any thought being given to setting up some kind of special purpose vehicle or some kind of mechanism to which money could be allocated in expectation of it being dispersed to, for example, businesses that continue? We will sadly probably have, for example, hospitality businesses closed further into, or at least restricted further into 2021 than certainly I would like. I would quite like to go to a hospitality business now. I think we all need it. But how can you kind of bend the rules, interpret the rules to the maximum in order to get money allocated that can be spent in financial year 21-22? For example, FTC money certainly is there. I know that's a financial transaction, but are there ways you can allocate this money for spending in the next financial year that you're thinking about?
We are. I mentioned a wee bit earlier that we are trying our best to understand and interpret the financial rules to allow us to spend this funding within the financial year. Now, we're not going to do that to the detriment of the overall public expenditure rules or to governance procedures. That's not possible. We'll not do that. But we are looking at how we best push the envelope in terms of that. So we're talking to Treasury about the rules that are in place in England and how those are interpreted. We're talking to the Audit Office about what sort of view they might take on issues that would arise if we spent funding in a certain way. We are doing our best to ensure that funding is allocated appropriately. It's allocated to areas where we can support public sector, we can support the vulnerable, we can support business this financial year and spend it in this financial year. And we're doing everything we can possibly think of to make sure that those boundaries are challenged but not exceeded.
I suppose one final question. What date did and we may have told this at a previous hearing and I've forgotten about it, so apologies. What date did the Finance Minister write out to his ministerial colleagues to encourage them to come up with novel schemes? I know he wrote in the last week or two, but prior to that, in the autumn?
So I don't have the information specifically to hand, but the Minister has on a number of occasions through, for instance, at the end of September monitoring as part of the executive paper, he had encouraged his executive colleagues to look for ways in which funding could be spent and had encouraged them to support businesses and areas where gaps had still to be covered and still where support still hadn't found its way to certain sectors. So he had continually made sure that he was expressing that opinion and encouraging his executive colleagues to look for ways in which that funding could be spent.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. And sort of, Jeff, just before I go, sort of just a few comments from the chair. It's not questions, but look, not having a fiscal council in place, which would have a method of oversight if we were thinking along the lines of special service vehicles, and speaking as somebody who was part of the Economy Committee just before we collapsed through what can only be described as some novel accounting procedures that had gone on beforehand, I'm quite nervous about language about things like pushing the envelope. And we do appreciate we need this money spent, but this place does not have a good reputation by any stretch of the imagination for novel financing and accountability and responsibility. We have to be extraordinarily cautious. And I feel the same when we hear about discussions about novel finances. Without a fiscal council in place, the only safeguard that we have are the committee structure here in this assembly. And unless we have sufficient information and knowledge of what's going on in some of these procedures, I personally, and I'm not speaking for the rest of the committee, but I have to state that I'm quite nervous about languages, particularly around novel finances and the rest of it. You know, we do need to get this money spent, but we need to be very cautious. And I also am drawn back again to the words of the Permanent Secretary when we were discussing arm's length bodies not so long ago, when she was quite concerned about the oversight of funding within arm's length bodies and where they were going to hear that as part of the solution to this problem might be giving extra resources to the arm's length bodies. But Jeff, I know it's been quite a long session and the rest of it, but as usual, thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for your candour. And you'll probably be going back and thinking, thank goodness that's all over. But I just wanted to say thank you very much indeed. And Pamela, sorry we didn't get much chance to talk to you as well, but no doubt you were taking all excellent notes, and we'll be reporting back as we go through. But again, Jeff and Pamela, thanks very much indeed, and please keep safe. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks,
Okay,
Chair.
thanks. Okay, team, I'd just like to advise that at the meeting on the 17th of February, the committee will receive oral briefings from RAISE on its analysis of the forecast and outrun data provided for the committee. This will help inform the members' consideration of the departmental oral evidence at the same meeting on the spring supplementary estimates, which reconcile all movements arising from monitoring rounds in this financial year. They're going to have to do quite a lot of work if they're going to be able to reconcile all the movements arising from monitoring rounds, because I don't think we've had full visibility by any stretch of the imagination and reconciling of the movements that have gone through as well. If we're content, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. It's item 6, oral evidence from the Department of Finance Public Procurement Common Framework. I think we've got Des and Michael. Are you up, Des?
I think so.
Oh, chair. Hey, empty chair. I have loved to do that so often.
But you wish that was you mean?
Des, if you're happy to continue, and yeah, that's much better for Michael looking that way.
Apologies.
No trouble at all. Committee, the clerk's procurement framework notes on page 44. Departmental briefing is in tabled items on page 49. page 70, page 87 and page 99. Des, could you crack on and make your opening statement, please? Thanks very much indeed.
Sure. If it's okay with you and members, I was going to ask Michael just to give you the background to the common framework work, because Michael has been involved very closely with colleagues right across Cabinet Office and through the other administrations. If that's okay, Michael would be the resident expert on this, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Des. Just to give you a bit of an overview, public procurement was identified as a policy area that would benefit from a framework, as were many other areas, as we left the European Union. Previously, the devolved administrations have all had memorandums of understanding and concordats with Cabinet Office to coordinate the public procurement and engagement with the European Commission. Cabinet Office has been leading on this work. It was one of many work streams and part of the operational readiness preparations for EU exit, which included a range of other procurement functions that needed to be agreed and drawn up. The framework is very, very high level. It's a vehicle where the administrations will come together to discuss and make each other aware of particularly policy development as opposed to legal development. And that's there really to ensure that we have a consistent application of public procurement policy within the UK internally, so that suppliers can easily access and bid for opportunities in all the various regions. And particularly the framework will allow for a consultation exchange of information. You'll see some wording in the framework that we still have respect for each of the devolved administrations to develop their own policies that they will need to do to use public procurement to further wider objectives they'll have in each of their areas. But we will do that on a no surprises basis, and we will always try to make sure that we do not inadvertently put a policy in place that would prevent suppliers from each of the areas bidding for work, which is really important. And at a minimum, we will agree to honour any international obligation that is resulting from any future trade agreements or free treatment, such as GPA, that is there at the minute. And there is a dispute resolution process in the back, which, as I understand, is standard in all common frameworks provided by the Constitution Group in Cabinet Office. We are currently just coming to the end of phase 3, awaiting for JMCEN agreement to that outline before going into phase 4, which will require deeper consultation with stakeholders. I hope that's sufficient detail, but happy to take any questions.
I think it's just been something's crashed, I think.
Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty here. Just bear with us. I think he's finished unless Des has something to add.
So, has anybody got some questions? I'm trying to bring up my system, which is crashed at the moment, so I'm having difficulty bringing up my papers. But sort of, go ahead, please, Jim.
Yeah, could I just ask, as concise as you can, what has been the impact of the EU protocol on where we go? Just broke the arrow.
Sorry, can you hear us okay? Mr. Alistair just asked a question.
Sorry, Mr. Alistair, I'm not sure whether there's still a bit of a break-up in the system. The issue in terms of the common framework is, it's clearly stated that there is no intersection between the common framework and the protocol. So in terms of the framework really is around establishing common public procurement policy, sharing information, various devolved administrations discussing common issues and matters of concern. So it doesn't really run through to that.
So you can assure us that there is no protocol impact on procurement?
Well, that's a different issue, I suppose, in terms of there's likely, I suppose, to be issues that may arise around supply chains, but those matters would be dealt with in terms of contracts that are in place an impact on performance rather than anything that's related to the common framework on public procurement.
So if there were any EU rules touching upon the do's and don'ts of procurement, that wouldn't impact on the work you're doing?
Well, in terms of what we're doing at the moment, in terms of the fact that we've now moved towards World Trade Agreement membership, the regulations require European member states to treat World Trade members the same as they would suppliers in the member states for work that's above threshold. So there is some read across in terms of the public procurement regulations and the EU directives. Whether that diverges or not as we go forward, I couldn't comment at the moment. But what we have in place now is public procurement regulations amended to take account of the withdrawal. And that places, as I say, in the status, in the regulations of being a World Trade Organization member, and therefore entitled to participate in public procurement competitions across the EU region and treated in the same standard as other member states' suppliers would be.
But I suppose the point I was really trying to explore is I understand the WTO membership gives you the right to trade in that regard, but what I was interested in, if the EU were to bring in further provisions which governed how procurement had to be organised and arranged, would that impact upon us?
Again, the issue would be that the World Trade Organization member would have to decide that they wish to participate in the EU regulated competition on the terms that had been agreed by the EU, and that the EU would treat World Trade member organisations or suppliers in the same way they would treat any other member state. So that's the point, I suppose.
Okay,
going forward.
Just pursuant to Jim Allister's question, there is an issue here with sort of public procurement and the rest of it, and when we're doing procurement, many of our companies wouldn't describe themselves as Northern Ireland only or GB only, they would say themselves as UK companies. But if they're bidding, and let's say they're based in Wolverhampton for state of argument, and are given some form of support from sort of GB government, how does that play with, particularly with sort of competition rules and the level playing field? Because bearing in mind the significant amounts of public procurement and the amount of money that would have to go out to contract, in Northern Ireland, do we have to apply the EU acquis, i.e. we have to go through the EU common procurement document and publish it in the EU Gazette, or do we stay purely within the UK system?
Right. I suppose I need to just consider that. Michael might have a view on that. And
I'd like to. Yeah, at the minute, the amendments that have been made to the procurement rules still only require us to publish on a new final tender service, which has been introduced as a replacement for the OJU system that was previously therefore as part of European requirements. The only way we would continue the advertising OJU is if there was European funding money still being applied within the procurement. We would still have to follow some of the European rules. But they're under GPA, the only requirement that we have is to have a single portal for the UK, so that any supplier coming from another country which is a member of the WTO can access procurement opportunities in a single portal.
Okay, so your understanding is that there's no way that a company in Northern Ireland or a contract in Northern Ireland that's done by a UK company which is based on UK procurement rules is going to be chased by, let's say, a company in the Irish Republic that says I wasn't able to bid for that contract under the the protocol and the provisions of the TCA?
The GPA will require, similar to the European rules, that anything that's above the specified thresholds, which is approximately £120,000 for goods and services and £4.5 million for construction, we will have to follow the principles of transparency, fairness and non-discrimination as they are currently sitting within what would have been the European rules. It's when it falls below that threshold, it's not clear that anybody has to comply with laws, basically. Previously, that was controlled by the Treaty of the Function of the European Union, and it was more of a cross-border trade issue. I think some clarity is needed of whether that would impact on the protocol at all.
Which, of course, would be a matter for the Specialist Committee and the Joint Committee working groups if they were ever set up.
Possibly, yes. I think it's more of a constitutional issue in trade. Trade not being a devolved matter, it's very difficult for us to have anything to say about that.
And just if this new framework is adopted, will we need new legislative powers here in Northern Ireland as part of the Assembly to deal with this?
No, it's non-legislative.
So even though we're dealing with procurement issues, the Department of Finance has set itself up as a procurement board. We're dealing with substantial amounts of government monies for procurement. It's not. You do not believe that we'll need any more legislative powers than we have at the moment?
Well, I think, just to try back and maybe come in, I think that this has always been the issue, that there are, when we were part of the EU, there were requirements that came directly through from the directives into legislation and regulation. But there were also a set of measures which were local policy measures, where individual devolved administrations could make their own policy. So the legislation, for example, doesn't describe the type of contract that you might want to use to run a procurement process against. So, for example, in Northern Ireland, in terms of construction contracts, we moved to the NEC 3 type of contract. Now, that's a local policy decision, not something that is within what was the existing legislation. But there always has been a bit of a discussion in the past as to whether we needed a procurement act. And the position we have taken up to this point is that we will deal with these things through administrative action rather than by a procurement act. Scotland took a slightly different view and produced a procurement reform act. But that it is possible as we go forward, there might be a decision to strengthen any policy initiatives by putting additional legislation in place.
There's also an opportunity here because, from listening to what you've said, and thank you very much indeed for your evidence so far, and the analysis we've had so far, actually there's probably nothing to stop us having a Northern Ireland first procurement process that previously we were told we couldn't do because of rules on EU competition and those sort of issues. So there's no reason why we couldn't be going for a Northern Ireland first procurement process for all government contracts to begin with, is there?
Well, I suppose that's a possibility. The issue then is, if others would adopt the same approach. I think that there's a guidance note out from England that says in the short term they should focus on local suppliers for below threshold procurements. That's the thresholds that Michael had laid out. That sort of thing, I think, concerns us in that it would prevent Northern Ireland firms from bidding in. But one of the things I think we need to do is to make sure we run a procurement competition, that we don't inadvertently rule out the opportunities for Northern Ireland firms, and that we're always promoting the Northern Ireland firm to be involved or have the opportunity to be involved in any contract that we're putting in place. And we've had a number of examples about this the last couple of weeks where things could have been made locally, but we've bought them off a catalogue that's been produced in the, it's been produced in the EU. So I think one of the things that we're looking at is resilience of supply chains, and that gives us the opportunity to look at what we could do with Northern Ireland suppliers. And I think some of the reshaping of the procurement board to bring in representatives from industry and from manufacturing will allow us to shine that bit of light into what we've been doing in the past in terms of specifications and looking for opportunities for Northern Ireland firms.
Do you know what, Des and Michael, what I'll call it is I'll call it the Des and Michael Northern Ireland First Bill, and we'll look forward to put that through part of procurement. Matthew?
Wouldn't a Northern Ireland First procurement policy literally undermine the purpose of having a UK common frameworks? No?
Yeah, I think the issue with the common framework is, that's one of the issues where to get that balance between things that are needed in a local context. Otherwise, why would you have procurement as it evolved matter, and the impact that it might have on the suppliers that operate across all of the various jurisdictions. So, you will see things, I suppose, in England where, Merseyside, wants to support suppliers, and Merseyside and Manchester wants to do the same, but the white fans fly up and down the M62 and like to have business in both areas. So there is issues around localism, but I think it's more around, rather than putting a barrier up and say we do not want anybody other than the folk from Bradford to work in Bradford, into making sure that we look at what the opportunity is from the total of the procurement and the total of the contract, and make sure that we try and encourage participation in that, rather than trying to set, we do not want people from our organisations from other areas.
Just on the Brexit interaction and the protocol, which I know gets blamed for everything, back to JR being shot at Dallas, but it's right to say, obviously, procurement is not covered by the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's not about trading goods. Have you had conversations with, this isn't about the politics of it one way or the other, it's just about how this stuff works. Presumably you, per force, will procure pretty regularly from contractors of different kinds in the Republic and Northern Ireland, providers, whatever, the construction or whatever, will be contracted in the Republic. What assessment has been done of the impact? Now, I know you said it's covered by the GPA, and theoretically the General Procurement Agreement under the WTO should mean that there's if I understand, and this is a very technical area, but it's a principle of non-discrimination, but it's not a deep, legally binding set of level playing field guarantees for providers that you get in the EU, whatever you think of the EU. But given we don't have those protections anymore, have there any conversations been had about impact on providers in the south who are perhaps regular people who contract for you and they're the best people and the most convenient for whatever reason, and likewise Northern Ireland providers contracting on the other side of the border, about possible impact, or is there a possible impact?
Yeah, well, I think obviously it's a developing situation, and we need to be made aware of any impact that comes through that way. We have, the Minister has reshaped the procurement board, and we have a member on there, for example, from the construction industry, and we've asked for that member, to give us give a watching brief, obviously on the impact, for example, on construction, and we'd expect, we're having a meeting of the procurement board, I think, next week, and we'll be asking for a bit of an update at that, just to try and really, that's that sort of stuff I think is very useful coming from supplier membership organisations who are feeling the heat on the ground, the issues that are practical, and we need to keep a watching brief on that. But you will always fall into a bit of an issue where the trade and the procurement issues clash a bit.
Yeah.
But it's how those are evolved is probably the difficult sticking point.
Have you heard that? Sorry, I was just going to ask if you'd heard anecdotally about, obviously there will be a lot of contractors who do work, for example, new hospital being built in Dublin or school being built wherever, and they would have won contracts as a matter of course. Have you heard about any anecdotal evidence about that stuff drying up, or there being, obviously some of it's impacted by COVID, but there being reports of that work drying up or being jeopardised?
I don't think we haven't heard anything directly on that. I think the big issue obviously has been the closing down of the construction industry activity at this particular time. We're aware that a number of suppliers who operate in both north and south would have, Northern Ireland and South in Ireland, would have maybe stockpiled materials in anticipation of some issues arising, across the end of the transition period, but been able to fully service their contracts that they were involved in. And now the issue in the south of Ireland is that, and so in Ireland is that that's closed down. They're left with material that is sitting there, and they're a bit concerned then that they need to get that material shifted so that they can replenish the stock for any future contracts that are in place. But I think one of the things that we need to do is over the next wee while is to again focus on what work we can do with the construction industry, for example, to get that feedback and try and come up with solutions and work with the industry to see if that can be resolved. But I think, for example, we could be a bit clearer, more transparent about where contracts are operating at the moment in terms of government and what the impact that is on those contracts and what flexibilities we might allow in contract terms in the short term to allow for the sort of difficulties that are occurring if they are occurring.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Okay. Pat?
Okay.
Yep, go ahead, Pat.
Thanks very much, Chair. It's just thanks, Michael and Des, I think it was. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. If this framework is adopted, I suppose we're looking at new powers and devolved into the executive. Will the new legislative powers devolve to the North? Will they be devolved to the executive in respect of the public procurement? I suppose, what will the powers look like? That's me. That's all I have to ask.
Well, the intention is that this framework will not be based on legislation. The overriding legislation will be in the adjustments to the public procurement regulations. This is around a commitment to not do anything at the policy level that would impact without further consideration on another party. So if we intend to do something in Northern Ireland on a policy area, this framework will commit us to discuss with Scotland, England and Wales our intention to do things and to take into account any impact it might have there. And similarly, if Scotland or England or Wales decide to do something on a policy area, they need to understand and allow us to put an input in for Northern Ireland, as so they're aware of any impact on that. But it's not legislation, it's more, I suppose, around official to official discussions. That's the intention at the moment.
Okay, well then, suppose, is there a timeline then for phase 4 of this public procurement framework development process? Are we talking years?
Michael, do you want to just update us where we are with the progress on the various phases?
It's not that the phase 4 will take long. I think the problem at the minute is that we haven't managed to secure the JMC agreement to complete stage 3 yet. I think the timeline on it is months rather than years. I mean, it's the public procurement one is certainly, as it says in the framework, is not critical, because we have the legal framework already in place to keep procurement operable. But I would imagine that it's a matter of months once the agreement is reached at JMCEN.
I'm sure that will definitely come back to this committee, won't it, for us to consider and respond to?
Yeah. So how long will the committee have to consider and respond to the public procurement common framework? Either Des or Michael.
We would be led by Cabinet Office on that, Chair. They are setting the timelines around that, but I would imagine it would be 3 to 4 weeks at least. There is a series of engagements to go in stage 4 again.
3 to 4 weeks. Okay, thanks, Tim. And can you indicate how the Concordat will be signed off And what happens if Northern Ireland ministers decide they're not going to sign it?
It's probably reasonably within their rights not to sign it. The Concordat is really just setting down the framework again in another document. We've had a Concordat, as I said, existing since the late 90s. All the administrations have. It's not something new to us. There is still a need to coordinate some procurement reporting activities as a member of GPA, which would have to come from UK. It couldn't come from the individual administrations. So there'd be a need for something in there. There may be some negotiation on the exact content of the Concordat. But it's quite within your rights to say that you don't agree with it.
Yeah, it's quite within our rights to say we're not going to sign it, but I think by your implication it doesn't make any difference whether we sign it or not.
That would be a fair assessment.
Thank you, Des. Thank you, Michael, and thank you very much indeed for your time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Team, subject to the indicated timescale surrounding the conclusion of the Phase 4 work, we'll probably think I would like to commission Reyes to do some more attribution paper on the applicable legislation covering the Concordat when it comes, and also to formally seek the views of our counterpart committees in the Scottish and Welsh Parliament, and potentially seek evidence from social enterprise. But I would like to get evidence from the Constructors and Employers Federation on the subject if we are agreed. Agreed. Move on to item number 7 on the agenda, a briefing for the organisation of OECD public sector reform. Matthew, this is your sort of geekery. It's a baby. This is your geeky thing. It's not geeky. It's not very fair. Adam, can you hear us? Come in, Adam.
Thank you.
Hello, Adam. How are you? Welcome to the.
I'm well. How are you?
Welcome to the Northern Ireland Assembly Finance Committee, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Sort of team Clark's cover note on public sector reform is on page 102. The OECD's PowerPoint presentation is pages 106 and 131, and the the Department of Finance written briefing is on page 151. Adam, could you care to make your statement, please? Thank you very much indeed.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to share some evidence on what the OECD thinks constitutes good governance, sound public governance. I was asked to present this last fall because I was told that the Northern Ireland Assembly, and particularly the Finance Committee, was interested in the building blocks of good governance, of sound public administration from an international perspective. So, as it happens, we have a narrative document that actually provides this kind of evidence in what we hope is a coherent and integrated fashion that is based on approximately almost 15 years worth of work in this area. It's called the Policy Framework on Sound Public Governance. It was finally published late last year, but it constitutes the culmination of about 15 years worth of work. It's based mostly on something called a public governance review, and that's an integrative assessment tool that national and subnational governments, constituent governments, ask the OECD to undertake to identify what works, what doesn't, and why in terms of the institutional and functional arrangements of the executive branch of government, and to provide recommendations or advice based on international good practice. So this work started in 2013, culminating at the end of 2020 with the publication of the document, the highlights of which I sent you. The framework is designed to be an integrated diagnostic and benchmarking tool to implement public governance, to harness public governance approaches for more governance considerations that need to be taken into account. And this framework hopefully can contribute to raising awareness of what those are and of including them in the healthcare policy framework. And it's designed to help governments move closer to OECD standards and practices. I should underscore that we conducted, and I had the honor myself, a public governance review of Northern Ireland. It was the first PGR of a constituent government. We started in late 2014, we delivered it in early 2016. So the policy framework reflects in part the findings from that PGR as well as from 20 odd others. The framework weaves together the existing OECD legal instruments and tools in public governance. It integrates evidence of emerging good practice in areas of public governance in which no OECD legal instrument yet exists, and it builds on similar exercises that have been developed by OECD agencies such as the EU Sigma Group, as well as the World Bank and UPAN and others. The framework is aimed at several target audiences. It's aimed at the centers of government, the government offices, the Prime Minister's offices, the President's offices, the First Minister's offices, wishing to assess government's participation, decision-making, and policy-making arrangements in order to improve their efficiency and effectiveness. It's aimed at the legislative and judicial branches that are seeking to modernize their approaches to governance. It's aimed at line ministries and government agencies and other public institutions, and it's aimed at civil society organizations. The elements of the framework are deceptively simple on one level. There are values that underpin good governance. There are the enablers of good governance, and then there are the policy instruments and the management tools. So the narrative is divided into two parts. Part one, which has 2 chapters in it, focuses on values and enablers. The values include integrity, openness and transparency, inclusiveness, participation, gender equality and diversity, accountability, and respect for the rule of law. The enablers relate to commitment, political and civil service vision and leadership, equitable and evidence-informed policymaking, whole of government coordination across administrative silos and policy areas, and innovation and change management, which is code for tolerance for failure. The second part, it's very important to learn from failure. Successes are one thing. You fail, you have to understand why. It's not failing, it's what you do with the failure. The second part is divided into 3 further chapters, and we could have sliced and diced this any way you wanted, but what we looked at was the continuum of the policymaking cycle. So we started with policy formulation and design, and then we moved to policy implementation, and then we look at policy evaluation. So in the policy formulation and design, first thing you have to do is identify what the problem is, if there's a problem, and is it a problem for governments to solve. Then how do you use your instruments and tools strategically? Of course, there are 2 clusters of instruments. There's rulemaking, that's what you do, the making of regulations and rules, and there's spending money or not spending money. And we look at strategic tools related to skills. Have you got the right people with the right skill sets in the right place at the right time to design and deliver policies and services that actually meet the needs of citizens and in a way that you know that they are in fact being met? bolster strategic planning, multi-year, multi-dimensional, digital capacity, and in order to improve the quality of policy formulation and design. Then you have implementation, how you manage it through strengthening of the digitization process, strengthening skill capacity, well-designed public procurement systems. You were just talking about that before. Strategic agility of the government. Can you move quickly to deal with an issue? Can you identify it correctly and then harness the stakeholders and the players and the tools and the money? How you engage in public-private and public-civic partnerships. And then after also looks at monitoring. Is the policy being implemented properly? How do you know? Can you demonstrate that it is? And then the final chapter focuses on policy evaluation systems, building an institutional framework for policy evaluation, fostering a culture of evaluation. It's important to understand the difference between monitoring and evaluation. Monitoring is simply ticking boxes. Did you spend this money on X, and did it do what it was supposed to do? Evaluation is different. It's normative. It requires you to step back and say and look at the initial objectives that you have identified as the rationale for putting the policy into place, and then assessing whether, having rolled the policy out and implemented it, did you achieve the strategic objectives you were trying to achieve? So when you built the hospital, okay, you can tick the box, you built the hospital. But did the hospital and its ecosystem lead to better public health outcomes? Did building the subway line lead to a reduction in GHG emissions? That is the essence of evaluation. And it's important to create mechanisms and structures to foster that kind of evaluation. And what we call feedback loops. In other words, take the results of the evaluation and feed it back into the policy-making process, leading to next generation policies that hopefully are better. So this framework, as I say, was the subject of a year's worth of consultation process with OECD country members, civil society organizations, civil servants, international organizations, and the general public. We held an online consultation process using social media. And to conclude, I just want to leave you with thoughts about the future of this framework. The framework was always aimed at being evergreen. The document that you have in front of you is the first iteration of this. But in future iterations, we want to include more and more sophisticated performance indicators in order to assist governments in moving along the spectrum of maturity models for various building blocks in public governance. We're already beginning to think about a policy framework 2.0 that will emphasize key institutional and functional trends adopted by member governments to manage the COVID crisis and to plan for a sustainable and inclusive recovery. This will necessarily highlight at a minimum the increasingly strategic role played by centers of government in managing the crisis and its aftermath. So that's about it. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And as I say, we conducted a public governance review of Northern Ireland in 2014 to 2016. So this framework reflects some of the findings that were that appear in the public governance review of Northern Ireland. And at your disposal.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. And I apologise if it broke up a bit as we went through. One of the biggest problems we have now in sort of virtual governance seems to be that the virtual bit seems to collapse quite a few times. But look, all the hard work you did in 2016, if you were marking us on a balanced scorecard, where would we be?
That's very easy to answer, and I hope you don't regard what I'm about to say as flippant. But I have no idea, since I've not set foot in Belfast since 2016. I don't know what the government did with the recommendations which is unfortunate, because we had offered to accompany the Department of Finance and Personnel to implement the advice we had provided. This is not a criticism, absolutely no criticism, but I can't answer your question about where you are. Furthermore, there was a long period between 2016 and now where you would revert direct rule from London. So the short answer to your question is, I don't know, but I'm happy to work with you to find out where you're at.
I think that it was a slightly disingenuous question of mine, because obviously one of the major pieces of trying to get the administration back up here and running was public sector reform, because it urgently needed it. And indeed, the Northern Ireland Civil Service needs significant reform to be able to deliver. And many of the recommendations that came from your OECD report, on particularly about programme for government and process, seem to, from an outsider's perspective, seem to have been looked at, but haven't seemed to be particularly actioned. And I find it's quite strange, because at the moment we're supposedly being, as if they're on tablets on high from the mountains, are about to be delivered to us, about how the necessary public sector reform is going to be done. And I find it quite interesting that the experts in public sector reform who helped write the report in the first place haven't been invited to come and have a look and have a quick look at the balanced scorecard. I was asked in the media the other day what I thought if it was on a balanced scorecard, because unfortunately I worked in government for too long and I know all about these things. And I said there would be an awful lot of reds and very few up arrows. So I would really like you to be brought in and to come back, having done the original work, and sort of to mark the homework in a way of being independent. But I hope that's not a forlorn hope, but it may be one of the things we as a committee afterwards might be asking the Department of Finance to do, even for a desktop exercise, which everybody seems to be doing. But there's a few questions from the committee just to come through. Sir Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Well, you've sort of stolen my thunder, because I was going to suggest that the OECD come back in some form, whether that's virtually, to do an evaluation review or an update since 2016. You mentioned, Adam, that some of the framework you just talked us through was born out of, or was inspired by, putting it too strongly, or it was influenced by your time here and studying governance here. What do you mean by that? What specifically?
Well, what I meant was that the genesis of the creation of the public policy framework was the OECD member states, the representatives who focus on public governance issues sit on one of the 26 committees of the OECD called the Public Governance Committee.
Come on, please.
That was the answer.
Can you hear me?
You just cut out for a second.
Okay?
You're back now.
Hello?
Yeah, you're back now, Adam. We can hear you now.
So in 2013, the Public Governance Committee asked the Secretariat to produce lessons learned from these public governance review. I mean, each country is different. Each country has its own sui generis approach to governance. But beyond these distinctive attributes, are there commonalities from which we can draw some useful lessons on how to improve governance, under the assumption, of course, that good governance is not an end in itself, it's a means to serve citizens better. So we went about compiling these lessons. There were indeed commonalities. I mean, as I know you know, the OECD is made up of a wide variety of governance systems, from highly centralized presidential systems to constitutional monarchies to highly decentralized federations. Yet there are commonalities that speak to methods that work best across all of these systems on how to serve citizens properly. That is the genesis that led to the construction of this narrative that is presented in the policy framework. The repository of those lessons are first and foremost the 20-odd public governance reviews that we conducted since the first one was in 2007. One of those 20-odd reviews was the one for Northern Ireland.
Okay. Just on that review, which is obviously extremely thorough, 500 pages long, and one of the first biggest conclusions you come to, and obviously something that we all probably have come to as well, is the importance of, given the mandatory coalition and the consociational, if that's my phone or someone else's, and the consociational nature of our institutions, the importance of a multi-year programme for government with agreed strategic objectives and policy outcomes. Not trying to put you on the spot, but how, if I was to put it to you that since you did your review, we're on the same draft programme for government that I think would have been whenever I believe this programme, the review was published in mid-2016. Well, our institutions are using the same draft programme for government, which has never actually been signed off. So, do you think, given the conclusion in that document was that the nature of a mandatory coalition with the split in our society, tragic and frustrating though it is at times, it's there, and we have these institutions, that did you find that it was particularly important for our institutions, more so than in other types of governance, that we have an agreed programme to be working to?
If I've understood, the short answer is yes. I think it's extremely important to build consensus around a set of commonly defined policy objectives that get translated into specific government actions over the life of its mandate, over the 4 or 5 years. That these also constitute, or the result of, a consensus that's been built, particularly in jurisdiction like Northern Ireland, where you yourself said where the historic divisions are such that you can't really do anything without some degree of consensus. So what we were trying to advise in the area of coordination and strategic planning is to overcome the silos, whether they're administrative, policy, or community, in order to agree on a set of common medium-term development objectives for the society, for Northern Ireland and its citizens. So yes, that was one of the drivers of the review.
And I'll try and make this one quicker. One further question. I don't know if you, and I'm sure the OECD does work, but I don't know if you've looked at the related question of public trust in political institutions and governance. Do you think there is a sort of inverse proportionality to the when you've got a political institutions that have, for example, a mandatory coalition that have more coalitions or more constitutional, consensual, involve grand coalitions of either mandatory or voluntary. Does that make it more important that you have clear, deliverable policy plans, in the sense that if you have for example, at Westminster at the minute they have a single party government, but I might dislike very much their political agenda, they do have an overwhelming majority. So there's, in a sense, there's less pressure on them to prove to the public their legitimacy because they does that make sense?
I would submit that there isn't necessarily a causal relationship. It's not up to me to engage in political discussions, but you have current situations where governments have a very strong majority in Parliament and where trust is declining extremely rapidly. And you have other situations in which you have what the British call hung parliaments that are working very well. We've done a lot of work on public trust in government. Trust is what the economists call a positive externality. It's an effect. It's not an objective of policymaking. It's a byproduct of good policymaking. And one of the drivers that we've seen across the membership, we've done studies in Korea and in Japan, in European countries, in the United States and Canada, and in Latin America over the course of several years. One of the quintessential drivers of trust is service quality. It doesn't matter whether you've got a huge majority or you're clinging to a hung parliament. If your services are of good quality and are perceived as being of good quality, and there is universal access, and the government turns around quickly to respond to a request, that does more to raise trust in government than almost anything else.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Jim?
Yeah, I hear nothing from you about opposition. Do you not think that a properly functioning and funded opposition is a vital component in delivering good government?
Yes, absolutely. We are beginning work. We're beginning work democracy. The Public Governance Directorate, is the directorate in which I work, the OECD, has focused on the executive branch, so the administration of government, the machinery of government, if you will. But given what's been happening across the OECD in the past 18 to 24 months, I mean, France faced the Gilets jaunes over a 12-month period 2 years ago. The United States is going through what it's going through. Other countries are going through situations in which the political middle is being hollowed out. These issues are now becoming front and center for the Public Governance Committee. And the challenge, therefore, that we are beginning to look at is how can the civil service and how can the public administration contribute to sustaining effective democracy? And of course, one of the hallmarks of OECD democracies is the existence of a governing coalition and an opposition that can play the challenge function. So, but as I say, our role is to look at the executive branch, the administration, and how it can contribute strengthening the future of democracy.
So could I suggest to you that the next time you look at Northern Ireland, you might examine the negative impact on good government, both of not having an opposition and having an absurd system of government where you can't change your government?
Well, we're certainly open to looking at anything. We would have to discuss I'm sorry to sound like a bureaucrat here, but we'd have to discuss the terms of reference of whatever it is we would do with Northern Ireland. I personally think it might be worthwhile to take a look at the current situation, benchmark it against the advice that was given in 2016, see what progress has been made, see where there's still things that could be done, and possibly work with the government and the Assembly to implement the advice that we gave. If we need to change the advice as a result of 5 years worth of evolution, then we can certainly do that. But I guess the bottom line is that we stand ready to work with you. We would simply have to decide the framework of how we would engage.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Just before you go, Adam, just skipping through my papers here, I've discovered that the department has produced a balanced scorecard against what they've achieved against OECD recommendations. And I won't, obviously, for issues of confidentiality, read them out, but it'll not come as no surprise to you that they've scored themselves nearly all green. But Adam,
well, the department hasn't shared it with us, so we don't know.
I don't think I would be scoring it that way. Adam, thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for your time, and apologies for the slightly dodgy link, but thank you, and keep safe.
It's a pleasure. Thank you
keep
very
safe.
much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, team, thanks very much indeed. It's interesting that the OECD haven't done the report in 2016, and where the genesis of a lot of the work that's supposed to be in public sector reform and where we're getting to hasn't been invited back to at least even do a desktop review of where we're going to, and also to the fact that fairly shortly, if we've been given the understanding, is there are various papers going through the executive at the moment about reforming the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and particularly taking in RHI reforms and how government is being managed. I would like your consensus and approval that we write to the Minister asking him to invite OECD back to do a desktop review of progress that has been made, so that will give us as a committee at least an independent arbitration of effectiveness of the reforms that they're likely to be, because the department has reported greens against itself, which I think most departments would ever do. But I think it might be useful, bearing in mind the work that the OECD did in the first place, and particularly with the emphasis on co-design. I cannot see any reason why the Minister wouldn't want OECD back to do at least a desktop review of progress and what they've done so far, if we are content.
Chair, I would only be content with that if the terms of reference include looking at the capability of the system of delivering good government.
I think that is a very fair commentary, and I think we'd be happy to do that. Matthew?
I agree. Basically, I'm not sure. I understand why Jim is saying that, but I'm not sure that would be, as it were, in order. I don't mean in what your comments aren't in order. I just mean they may not be able to do that in the time scale that we would be asking them. But I agree with the general principle. I don't have any objection to the to what Jim said, but I do think the general idea of getting into doing a benchmarking update.
Well, rather than as we'd normally do, is sort of draft a letter by committee. We'll draft a letter. I'll circulate it around you for any comments, and then we'll send that off if we're content. Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda, chairperson's business. I just wanted to inform you that on Monday, the finance minister met myself and the deputy chair, and we discussed the pre-monitoring round. Second item of chairperson's business, I've been made aware that there's another bill, that's a private member's bill, that's likely to come in our way, and it's the defamation bill raised by Mike Nesbitt, which comes under our purview because obviously through the departmental solicitors and the rule to do that as well. As I get any other details, I will inform you. I'll inform the deputy chair, but we'll brief you as you go forward. I also note from comments that have been made from various members of the role of having a member of the committee who was helping as we went through the bill process, regardless of what we thought of the bill, but actually having somebody available of that, and the view that having an ex officio member during that process was particularly helpful. Obviously can't vote on the bill, but actually can provide, is there to provide questions and the rest of it. I'm going to take extra advice on that, and through the chair and also through the Speaker's office to do that. But I think that might be a good framework to do that as well. Jim, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say I had intended at some point to suggest that the committee should write to the Procedures Committee, promoting such an idea. I think there was an amendment drafted by Paul, which wasn't called at consideration stage, which encapsulated the idea. I must say, having been involved in 2 private members' bills, one where I wasn't on the committee and one where I was, the difference from the perspective of the sponsor member is quite considerable, and I think equally probably from the point of view of the committee. So if the committee was willing, I would like to see this committee advocate to the Procedures Committee that they look at that in the light of what was in Paul's draft amendment.
Yeah. And Gemma, I remember one of your discussions about trying to get through a sort of private member's bill and the difficulties you were having. Would you be content for us to write in that, if we were to raise that and write that to the what committee again?
Procedures Committee.
Procedures Committee. I'll be writing anyhow to the to the Speaker and also to the Procedures Committee. But I think as a committee it might be worth us writing so they can at least explore the issues, because I think, Gemma, you raised the issue and I think it would be quite useful. And regardless of where we stand on Jim's bill, but actually having the bill sponsor present while we're going through some of the evidence gathering session, I thought was very useful. And it added a lot, I think, to the analysis and the scrutiny of the processes we're going forward.
Yeah, sure, that shouldn't do any harm, I don't think. Just be interesting to see what is said or what the procedure is around it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I'll do that. I'll take that as an action to report back to the committee. Sorry, Jim.
A couple of things. First of all, I see Robinson's just announced £500 recognition payment to every health worker, so that'll help get rid of some of the money we were talking about earlier.
Yay!
And secondly,
excellent, the Health Minister. Shall I record our vote of thanks in our Health Minister and the Ulster Unionist Party? Yes! Yep.
It's not an election year for me.
What do you see next year, Jim?
Glad to see, Mr. Chairman, you're entirely impartial.
And only on some things, Mr. Wells.
What I would say I know whilst procedures are looking at this, is there anything to stop us asking Mr. Nesbitt to come and sit in those, when we're discussing his bill, and to sit and we can ask him questions? Is there anything actually to stop us doing that now?
I think the problem is...
Sorry, through the clerk.
I think the problem is that if the bill sponsor isn't on the committee, then he only has speaking rights when he's called to give evidence. Whereas if he was an ex officio member, though he wouldn't have voting rights, he would be there at all times the bill was being discussed, or could be.
But is that not semantics? Because could we not permanently ask him to come and give evidence every time his bill is being discussed?
I think that would be a bit of a
through the chair. But through the chair, I think the easiest thing is actually, Peter, if we can get some.
I think the member's right. Clarity would be
clarity.
But my understanding is the standing orders already permit, or sorry, maybe not standing orders, but practice already permits the committee to invite any member onto the committee. They can't ask questions. They obviously can't vote, but they could make comments. But clarity from Procedures Committee would be probably.
I think it would be useful.
Chair.
And sorry, just for the sake of the record as well, Gemma, that was he or she doing sort of the details and asking the questions. Sorry, Paul.
Why it's important that they come on as an ex officio is the very point that the clerk makes, so that they can ask the questions. Because you can bet your bottom dollar the person who knows the bill the best isn't the scrutiny committee or the members. It's the actual bill sponsor, and they will ask the most ingrained question and the most informed question, and hopefully then get the most sufficient answer, which then informs us all as a committee. So it's really important that there's a presence felt for any bill sponsor. I am a big supporter of this now. It was Gemma inspired me with regards to my amendment, which wasn't picked up or taken by the Speaker. But the present should still stand. It helped us immeasurably by having the bill sponsor sitting on this committee by chance. It should be an effect, and it should be a practice that all committees now would encounter going through all scrutiny of bills.
Yeah.
Really.
And speak. Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
And he's just announced £2,000 for all non-salaried qualified nurses as well. So the money's been going out of department and castle buildings.
Well done, Robin Swan, the Health Minister. Well done, the Ulster Unionist Party. Hurrah! Right. Sorry, Pat.
Hello, can you hear me? Do you bring me on the sound?
Yes, we can, Pat.
Okay, no, that is well done, but I do have to stop you in your enthusiasm there, Chair, because this was muted by the STLP back on the 17th of June. Only 500 workers.
Oh, what a bit of the action.
All the glory of it. I think that we can say that it's across the garden. It's well deserved, and we welcome it, having it been called out first by Mark H. Durkin of the STLP. So great that the Minister is listening.
They'll have many fathers, I'm
Here, here. But just to move on, to go to the germane matter, I think we'll write to the. Sorry, go ahead, Pat.
I hope when that does come out, and I'm thinking from the Finance Department, could we not broaden that out to include care workers in the independent sector as well?
I think we can wait another 5 minutes, actually, as the briefings are coming through. Not saying I might have some slight knowledge of this.
We tend to get a lot of our information coming in very late to it, but it's just that it's something else that it's on top of that. That'll be good to see that those that are workers in the independent sector are also thought of, because they have done an absolute Hercules job as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. But I think the action we indicated, particularly on inviting ex officio members on for the bill, I think we should we'll proceed with that. But we will take advice and legal advice about it to Peter as well. Move on to the next item of the agenda, item number 9, correspondence. Draw members' attention to the correspondence at page 138. Draw members' attention to correspondence page 174 from NISRA with its analysis of sickness absence in the Northern Ireland Civil Service. The figures show that absence in the first quarter of the financial year was lower than the previous years. The number of days lost was down by a third, and the proportion of staff with no periods of absence was up by around 10%. However, during the summer, absence increased a little. COVID-related absence accounts for only about 5% of absence in the period. 45% of absence was recorded as stress-related. Do members have any commentary? Are we happy to note and say agreed? Agreed. Next item on the agenda, review of the financial process. Draw members' attention to correspondence in the Department, including a draft guidance booklet on the spring supplementary estimates, which indicates that the review of financial processes has been delayed to 22-23. The SSC booklet explains a lot of terminology in the estimates document, which members will receive at the meeting on the 10th of February 21. The Department is revising the financial process involving improved alignment between the estimates and departmental annual reports and accounts, and the Department has apparently previously sought feedback from the committee on the level of detail it wants to see in departmental budget papers and asked other departments to engage with the committees. If we're happy, I would like us to write to the Department seeking an update on the SSE dry run process and the estimates guidance booklet when they say it's complete. Go ahead, Jim.
At page 209 of the pack, we have what's proposed in respect of the black box issue. I've previously raised that I would like a column of clear explanation as to why there is no legislation in place and why any particular item relies on the authority of the budget bill only. Officials have previously said such a column could be provided, but it hasn't been done in this draft.
And it should be there.
I would like such a column, and I think the committee has agreed that in the past.
I think we agree to that as well. The other issue as well, we are doing this in the spring supplementary estimates. We're looking at financial processes, we're looking at all this. But yet again, we still don't have the Fiscal Council in place. And it's now well over a year since the Fiscal Council was first mooted as part of the New Decade, New Approach. And I think, again, the Minister has told us on numerous occasions we're about to get details of the Fiscal Council shortly, or this week, or whatever. I would propose that we write to the Minister again and also contact the DALO, get some information on when we're actually going to see this Fiscal Council. And we should have a statement or a note from him stating when this is likely to go ahead. Because I've sat here for well over a year hearing the Minister, and I'm sure he's doing it. He is telling us in all good faith that he is about to produce this Fiscal Council, the Memorandum of Understanding for it, its terms of reference and the rest of it. And so far, here we are. We have seen nothing. Okay. Are we agreed? Agreed. Move on to Committee for the Economy, Support for Students. Note and correspondence, page 278. Copy to the Committee from the Committee for the Economy to the First and Deputy First Ministers in respect of COVID support funding for students or other excluded groups. Are we content?
Content.
Agreed. Agreed. PAC report on the Land Web project and digital transformation. I'd like to draw attention to the correspondence on page 281 from the Digital Accounts Committee, including its report on the Land Web project and digital transformation. I would like to schedule a briefing from the Department of Finance once the PAC has considered the Memorandum of Reply in response to any recommendations. Now, that is the formal mechanism because it is still with the PAC, even though the report has been published, but it's still with the PAC. However, I have a real concern because we have heard the Minister already saying that he's looking to do additional spends potentially on issues of ICT and other sort of short-term measures to be able to spend part of this budget or the 1.5 billion. I am really concerned if you read that report, the discussion points about BT and how BT basically ran rings around the department for the best part of a very long time. And I would be very concerned that BT are being considered for future contracts unless there's been significant changes. If you read that report, all it shows is the department just got rings run around it by BT. And yet again, we're told on many occasions BT are the preferred bidder or what they need to do. I would propose that we write to the Minister asking him to consider whether any contracts with BT are suspended until such times as the formal Memorandum of Reply has been delivered by the PAC, and furthermore, the various committees have had the chance to establish whether using BT for future government contracts is an appropriate way of using government monies. Would we be agreed?
If I may, Chair, I suppose I think it's important to be cautious about this stuff. I should declare, I guess, an interest, but also I'm on the PAC and was involved in this inquiry. There are real serious issues about this contract going way back, and BT, rehearse the whole thing.
Just on, if it's anything that has to do with the PAC's work extant, we shouldn't be discussing it. But it's just in the published. The published.
It's not. No. This,
okay,
this
right,
is already published.
I just wanted to make sure we.
No, absolutely. No, I wouldn't. This is not. It's been established there are significant issues around this contract, and it's been reported both by the NIAO, which firstly reported on this several months ago, and then by the Public Accounts Committee. Having said that, I would be cautious about us as a committee implying that we are making a judgment that one particular commercial provider should be sworn off getting, a bit of work here or there, which we presume would be in line with procurement rules. The reason being that I'm in no way defending a company that that profited too handsomely from the public sector here over the course of a number of years, but at the same time they are still the provider. They are still the extant provider to the department, and I would be slightly cautious about us taking a view as a committee that we somehow disapproved of one particular commercial provider.
I think maybe I shall suggest a set of words with the clerk that I'll circulate, but is to be cautious about letting particularly ICT contracts. There will be a push to use the 0.5 billion less what we're. Come on, keep on keep me updated figures.
Go further now. Money's pouring out of Castle buildings as we speak.
Oh, it's a bit slow. Should be in a few more minutes, right?
Chair.
Yep, go on, Melissa.
Chair. Yeah, I'd like to endorse exactly what Matthew has said there, and I think that maybe we need to be very, very careful just on our own wording and the way we actually deal with the situation. That because it would nearly imply that we have a prejudice before we even start, in regards to BT or anything else.
Okay, I think what we should do is I'll suggest a set of words to circulate amongst you. But it is to be very cautious of companies that we have that are concerns with, particularly with that have been raised by indeed the PAC and the Audit Office as we go forward, because there will be a large amount of pressure to spend a lot of money in a short period of time. And what we don't want to do is, we heard the language earlier on from the Department of Finance and things from novel spending approaches and the rest of it. We do not want to be getting ourselves in a situation where afterwards we will be looking at this and saying, why did we go ahead with this particular piece? We're content? Yep. Department of Justice contractors taking legal challenges. The correspondence on page 305 from the Department of Justice in respect to legal challenges taken by contractors as part of the procurement process. The Department of Justice advises there are a number of other reforms underway in respect of civil proceedings there, but appears to be no plans at this stage to alter current arrangements. Do we have any comments on that? Because I remember when we were in the committee, we did discuss it. Seemed the fact, particularly when contractors, there seemed to be this process within the Northern Ireland system where we seem to be spending more time and more expense dealing with JRs than we actually did with the construction issues. And we asked the Department of Justice for a view on that.
I think, Chair, the point actually was that a disappointed company could delay the entire process. Correct. At relatively minor cost, namely the cost of issuing challenging proceedings to challenge in JR, which then might lie dormant for some months, and then at the end they might withdraw them or whatever, and that was stymieing the actual progress of procurement. I think that was the point, and I think the point that was raised with the department was, would a way of dealing with that be to make the fees to initiate such a process higher? And I think the department's been explaining that, well, they've set out what the costs are for a writ, etc., and obviously there would be difficulties in being selective. You couldn't say only a contractor would pay a high fee, etc. So I think they were pointing out the impracticalities of being able to do much about it.
Okay. Are we happy then, content to note it? Great. Okay. From the Department of Finance, response to the Committee for the Executive Office re EU Structural Funds. Correspondence on page 313, the Department of Finance, the Committee for the Executive Office, copied to the Committee with detail of funding of project related to EU Structural Funds. Any members' comments? Matthew? Basically, we don't have the information yet, so what I was asked your agreement was that we asked the department to keep us advised when executive decisions pertaining to replacement funding once it's been available, if we're agreed. Yeah. Agreed.
Great.
Move members' attention to the composite request on page 317. Note the committee's composite information request and to grant an extension to the department regarding the procurement board update, as the board is due to meet early next week. When are they due to come and speak to us?
I think we'd actually written to them, so we'd asked for an update. I don't know if we asked for an oral update, but I think it was probably on the 29th we were asking them to write back. They're saying I think they want at least another 5, possibly 10 days, because the board meets on the 3rd, I think.
I think we're happy. Yeah, good time. Sir Matthew?
I don't know if now's the right time to raise it, if we're on correspondence and our information requests.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did we ever hear back from my beloved former employers at the Treasury?
Nope, I haven't heard back from them at all.
Right, sorry.
We made a request for before your time, Peter, shows how long it's taken. In I think November now for an evidence session, and we initially had to bounce back in part, I think, because it went to a sort of generic inbox, but then we've still discovered the correct official to basically request either some kind of briefing on, I think it was initially the spending review actually, but I think it's even more pertinent now given what we know. But
well, ask him again. Chase him up. Okay. Moving on to item number 10, the Forward Work Programme. Forward Work Programme is at page 322. Sir Peter's been able to confirm that NIPSA, whether they will attend next week to discuss public sector reform. Apparently the NIPSA General Council election is underway. If this briefing was to be deferred, the committee might take the deferred briefing on free ports and state aid from RAISE. I think we should take that. Agreed. Seek agreement to add a briefing from the Ulster University Economic Policy Centre and also from NIC IC2 and Pivotal on the draft budget on the 10th of February. We're content? Yeah. Great. Remind members that the committee will be asked its views on accelerated passage from the Budget Number 1 Bill 2021 on the 17th. Legal and procedural advice will be provided next week in closed session. Yep. And seek agreement to remove the remaining public sector reform briefings and CE briefing on the PA report into capital projects until March and April. Are we agreed? Is this agreed? Agreed?
Agreed.
Is the committee content with the draft Forward Work Programme as amended? Say, are we agreed? Agreed.
Agreed.
And Peter, there was something you said you needed to amend something in our briefing earlier on, or if we covered that?
I thought you've probably done it with the informal meeting with the Minister.
Sorry, the speed with which we move here is absolutely stunning. In that case, AOB. Good. Right. Okay, team. Next Wednesday at 1400 here in the Senate chamber. The meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, members.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate chamber.